It's Thursday. Welcome back to Echoes from the Source.
It's good to be back.
This is our 9th deep dive together, and today we're going to be tackling something I think everybody has experience with, and that is blame.
Oh, yeah.
Blame?
Yeah.
Receiving blame, giving blame, feeling blame. Right. We're going to be looking at it through the eyes of Gurudev.
Okay.
And specifically, we're going to be looking at a chapter from his book, An Intimate Note to a Sincere Seeker. And, just think about it. Have you ever been blamed for something? And, how did it make you feel?
Oh, gosh. I mean, so many times. I think if you're human, you've been blamed for something at some point. And usually, it doesn't feel good.
It doesn't feel good, right.
You feel defensive. You want to push back against it.
Right.
Sometimes you feel angry. It's like, how dare you blame me for that sort of thing,
Right.
Or sometimes you feel guilty or ashamed, even if it wasn't really your fault. It's like, oh, I should, I could have, I would, but there's always that tendency to have that negative reaction to blame.
Yeah, and it feels like a burden.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
It feels like an unwanted weight. But what if blame, and this is what we're going to be talking about today, what if blame wasn't just this negative hit? Something bad happening to us? What if it had a hidden potential? What if it was actually a doorway to personal growth and even freedom?
Yeah, that's a radical shift in thinking.
It is a radical shift, right?
To think about something that feels so negative that we want to avoid could actually be something that could be used for our own benefit.
Right, and that's exactly what we're going to be unpacking today.
Yeah. So in this deep dive, we're really focusing on the core ideas that Gurudev presents about blame.
Okay.
And particularly this really powerful concept of non-resistance.
Okay.
We're also going to be looking at this intriguing notion of blame as a way to actually get rid of negative karma, sort of like this spiritual spring cleaning.
I love that. Spiritual spring cleaning.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, so we're going to be going to some really vivid metaphors that help illustrate this whole process.
Okay.
And we'll also be talking about how you can actually apply these insights to your daily life.
Okay, cool.
And we'll be talking about a story that really brings this seemingly abstract teaching down to earth.
Okay, cool.
To see how it actually works in practice.
Yeah, because, sometimes these concepts can seem kind of well, that sounds great in theory, but how does that work in real life?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think when we see it in practice, when we hear about how other people have applied it and what the result has been,
Yeah.
it makes it so much more accessible to us.
Yeah, I agree. So as we delve into this chapter, right, from An Intimate Note to a Sincere Seeker, I want you to kind of keep an open mind and think about, what if blame is not just a heavy load? What if there's actually a hidden key to freedom in that uncomfortable encounter? So let's start off by just thinking about that initial gut reaction. When somebody blames you, how do you usually feel?
As we were just saying, it's usually that immediate response is usually some shade of negative.
Yeah.
Right? You might feel attacked.
Yeah.
Misunderstood.
Yeah.
Maybe ashamed or guilty, like we were talking about.
Yeah.
And Gurudev really acknowledges this initial discomfort, that we have.
Right.
He knows our first instinct is often to either deflect the blame, make an excuse, or argue our case.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't me. You got it all wrong.
Right.
Or to retreat into ourselves and kind of build up these internal walls and just shut down.
Right. And this is where his teaching on non-resistance, I think, comes in.
Yes.
He says, whatever you resist persists. I mean, it's such a simple statement.
It is.
But think about the depth of that.
Yes.
It's not just about our outward reaction. It's about what's happening inside of us.
That's right.
Even if we're quiet on the outside,
Yes.
we can be having this fierce internal battle
Exactly.
against that accusation.
Yeah. And that internal fight, that tension and defensiveness,
Yeah.
that's really what exhausts us and what keeps that negativity alive. Because we're giving it so much energy.
Yes.
We're holding on to it. And Gurudev's wisdom here, it's not about being a doormat. It's about consciously choosing not to engage in that inner struggle. So on the outside, you might still need to address the situation. You might need to clarify. You might need to set a boundary. But inside, you can choose to remain open and calm.
Yes. It's like conserving your energy,
Yeah.
choosing inner peace over the drama.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
And allowing whatever it is to just pass through, almost without it taking root,
Yeah.
without it disturbing your center.
Yeah.
So, we might address things outwardly as needed, but inwardly, we release that urge to fight the feeling of being blamed.
Yeah. And I think that's where Gurudev's perspective on this really takes a surprising turn, because he draws on this ancient wisdom and he offers this really profound insight. He says, when someone blames you, they take away your bad karma.
Whoa, okay, wait. So most people think that blame is like bad energy being hurled at them.
That's right. Yeah.
And it's like making things worse. And he's saying it's actually taking away bad karma.
Yeah, he's completely slipping the script.
Yeah.
He's suggesting that when someone directs blame our way, whether it's justified or not, they're actually, in a way, helping us to release negative energy from our past.
So instead of feeling like a victim, we could potentially be feeling lighter,
Potentially, yeah.
almost grateful.
It's a strange thing to think about, but yeah.
It is a strange thing to think about, but in a deeply spiritual sense,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's not about seeking out blame,
You know.
but it's about recognizing that when it comes our way, it might actually be a form of energetic release. So blame from this viewpoint isn't something that binds us. It's something that potentially frees us.
Exactly. And the more we resist that process,
Yeah.
the more we hold on to that negative karma. But when we can accept that blame without that internal resistance, we're allowing that karmic weight to be lessened. So it's a fundamental shift from seeing blame as this attack to recognizing it as a potential act of purification, a way of cleansing ourselves from past negativity.
That reminds me of this anecdote that really resonates with this teaching. It's about a respected spiritual figure who, faced intense criticism in the media,
Right.
which was totally unfair. And his followers, naturally, were upset.
Yeah.
And they wanted to defend him. But the teacher simply advised them. He said, let them write. With every word, they are taking away a bit of my karma.
Wow.
Such a beautiful illustration of this principle in action,
Right.
choosing grace and acceptance in the face of negativity.
It really demonstrates the power of non-resistance and this understanding of blame as this karmic cleanser. Because instead of getting caught up in the drama and the negativity, the teacher chose to see it as release, this opportunity to offload some karma.
I love that. So to kind of help us really get this, let's explore some metaphors that might illuminate this concept.
Yeah.
One that I think is really powerful is the image of blame as a purifier,
Okay.
like the smoke from incense or a candle in a dark room.
Right. Yeah. That's such a vivid analogy.
Mm-hmm.
Because just as incense smoke clears the air and a candle flame dispels the shadows, blame, when we meet it with the right attitude, can clear away the darkness of negative impressions from our past actions.
Right.
So by not resisting, we become like that steady flame. We allow that darkness to dissolve around us without igniting our own anger or resentment.
Yeah, I love that. Another one that I find compelling is the metaphor of blame as a river that cleanses. Like a river doesn't judge the dirt it carries, it just flows and washes it away. So similarly, when blame flows towards us, it can be seen as this current that washes away the mud of our past negative karma, leaving us refreshed and lighter.
Exactly. It's about accepting this process of energetic purification
Mm-hmm.
without becoming attached to the negativity.
Right.
The river flows through us. It carries away the sediment. And we're left with a clearer, more peaceful inner landscape.
So, those are all really beautiful.
Yeah.
How do we take those rather profound ideas and integrate them into our everyday lives?
Yeah.
What are some practical steps we can take when we find ourselves facing blame?
Yeah, so I think the very first and most crucial step is to create a pause.
Okay.
When someone directs blame at you, resist that immediate knee-jerk reaction to defend or counterattack.
Right.
Just take a breath, even 1 or 2 deep breaths, and allow yourself a moment to just absorb the situation without that internal resistance immediately kicking in.
Right.
And that small act, that pause, it creates space
It does.
between the trigger and your response.
Right. So it gives you a chance to move from just a purely emotional reaction to a more conscious and considered response.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it gives you a chance to recall Gurudev's teachings. So the next step, based on what we've been discussing, is to actively reframe our understanding of karma in that moment.
Yeah, when blame comes your way, make that conscious effort to remind yourself that this person, in a way, might be helping you to shed some of that negative karmic weight. And that shift, that conscious reframing, it can really transform those feelings of anger or resentment into something closer to acceptance, even gratitude, this opportunity for spiritual growth.
Right. And that is so closely linked to releasing the need for justification, I
Yeah.
think. Because so often, like, the sharpest sting of blame comes from our ego's desire to defend itself.
That's right.
Right. To prove that we're right, the other person's wrong.
Yeah.
But Gurudev's wisdom suggests that our inner peace isn't contingent upon external validation.
Exactly.
So when you're being blamed, try to detach from that need to justify every action, every decision. Remind yourself that your worth isn't determined by someone else's opinion.
Yeah. And you can still address the situation factually if needed.
Right.
Right. To clarify.
Right.
But strive to do it from a place of inner calm
It-
and clarity, rather than from that defensive reactive posture.
Right. It's that inner calm. That's the cornerstone. Even if the situation feels chaotic or unfair,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Maintaining that stillness within
Yes.
allows for greater clarity
Absolutely.
and a more measured and effective response. And this principle, it doesn't just apply to how we receive blame. It also really impacts how we interact with others,
Yes.
right? Because, we're encouraged through these teachings to cultivate a culture of understanding and acceptance,
Yeah.
rather than just immediately resorting to blame ourselves.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And when we find ourselves wanting to place blame on someone else, I think it's a good time to pause and ask ourselves, do I really want to take on their negative karma?
Right.
Just that simple awareness
Yeah.
can really be transformative.
Yeah.
And this also extends to our engagement with gossip
Yeah.
or negative stories about others.
Yeah.
Because Gurudev advises against even listening to those stories.
Yeah.
Because that energetic vibration of blame can be contagious.
Right. Right. And it can weigh us down.
Yeah.
It's about becoming, like one source put it beautifully, space holders.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals who can hold that space, absorb the misunderstanding
Yeah.
without that immediate reaction.
Yeah.
Offer silence, offer understanding
Yeah.
instead of judgment and accusation.
That's beautiful.
So we mentioned earlier a personal story
Yes.
that really brings this to life.
Yes, I wanted to share about someone I know who had this long-standing pattern of being defensive. So any hint of blame, even over really small things, would trigger this immediate reaction, either arguing back or just withdrawing and feeling resentful.
Okay.
But recently, they were at a family gathering and they were unfairly blamed for something that clearly wasn't their fault,
Mm-hmm.
and it really stung.
Oh.
But in that moment, they remembered Gurudev's teaching. They remembered that whatever I resist persists.
Mm.
And instead of following that habit of lashing out or withdrawing, they chose to pause
Okay.
and observe those feelings without judgment. And it wasn't easy. That urge to react was strong. But they held back and they recalled Gurudev's words about karma. And they actively imagined that maybe this blame, this unfair blame, was actually helping to clear some past negative energy.
Okay. So what happened?
Well, the outcome was remarkable because by the end of the gathering, the atmosphere had shifted. The tension that had been there just moments before had dissipated. And they later reflected that while the blame was initially painful, it didn't linger with the same intensity. They'd not only avoided this outburst, but it actually created space for more harmony within themselves and within the family dynamic.
Yeah.
And that was a huge thing for them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it really showed how shifting your internal perspective can change the experience of being blamed.
Yeah. Because it's really about our inner response that dictates the impact that blame has on us. And, Gurudev's wisdom goes beyond receiving blame.
It does.
He also talks about the act of blaming others and the consequences of praise.
Yes. He points out that when we blame another person, we're taking on a portion of their negative karma. And conversely, when we offer praise, we're taking on a portion of their good karma. So it really encourages us to be mindful
Right.
of our interactions with others.
Right. Of how we're using our energy.
Yeah.
And what we're taking on. Right.
Exactly. And his guidance regarding this is to surrender both good and bad karma to the divine. And in that surrender, find freedom.
Yeah.
Not clinging to praise, not clinging to blame, just being who we truly are, much like the vastness of the sky remains untouched by passing clouds.
I love that. And he even goes into why both an unaware person and a deeply enlightened person
Okay.
might say, don't blame me.
Oh, interesting.
Right. An unaware person would say it out of ego because blame wounds their self-image.
Right.
But an enlightened person says it not for their own protection, but out of compassion, understanding the energetic implications for the person doing the blaming.
Yeah.
They don't want that person to accumulate negative karma.
Wow. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
That is beautiful, yeah.
Yeah.
Such a different perspective.
But such a different perspective. And these teachings really emphasize the importance of choosing not to repeat negative stories
Yes.
or to internalize and believe blame that's directed at ourselves.
Yeah.
It's like we have to prevent that negative energy from taking root
Yeah.
and defining our sense of self. One source put it beautifully. You are not the blame that others place on you. You are the eternal, unchanging awareness within.
Yes. That is so powerful. It's such a beautiful reminder that we are more than the temporary storms of judgment. And Gurudev in this chapter, he points us towards the path of surrender,
Yeah.
releasing both praise and blame to the divine
Yeah.
as a pathway to real freedom.
We can start to see blame not as an inherent burden, but as a potential pathway to liberation through the principle of non-resistance. And remember those powerful words, whatever you resist persists.
Yeah.
And that includes our internal resistance to feeling blamed.
Yeah, non-resistance, as we've talked about, isn't about passivity. It's about making a choice
Yes.
to let go of that struggle.
Yes.
And the key takeaway here is that when someone blames you, they take away your bad karma. Reframing blame is a form of energetic cleansing.
Right. So resisting that blame actually prevents the release of that negative karma.
Yeah,
But embracing it with acceptance allows for that karmic weight to be lifted.
that's right.
And we looked at the metaphor of blame as a purifier,
Yeah.
like incense or a candle, to help us really visualize this cleansing process. And in our everyday life, applying this wisdom means pausing, breathing when we're blamed, actively shifting how we look at karma, releasing the need for justification, and cultivating that inner calm
Yeah.
that remains undisturbed by all those external accusations.
And I think it's also vital to remember that our energetic interactions with others, they work both ways.
Yes.
So when we blame others, we take on their negativity. When we praise, we take on their positivity. And Gurudev says, surrender both.
Yeah.
And we saw that those who are enlightened might say, don't blame me, not for their own sake, but out of compassion for the other person.
Yes.
So choosing not to perpetuate those negative stories or internalize that blame that's directed at us, it helps us not carry around that negativity.
All right.
And ultimately, surrendering both praise and blame to the divine is that path to liberation.
Yeah. Well, think about it. When you resist blame, you're engaging with it, right? You're giving it your energy, your attention. You might feel anger, frustration, maybe even guilt. And all of that fuels the blame, makes it grow bigger in your mind.
So it becomes this sort of internal battle.
Yes, exactly. One of the sources even called it a tug of war with reality, which I thought was really apt. You're so focused on proving yourself right, on denying the blame, that it takes over your thoughts and feelings.
And that's where this idea of non-resistance comes in, right?
Yes, exactly.
Now, when I first read about this, I have to admit, I was a little skeptical. I thought, wait a minute, are you saying I should just accept blame even when it's completely unfair?
I can see how you'd think that. But that's not quite what non-resistance is about.
Okay, so what is it about then?
It's not about passivity. It's not about saying, oh, yeah, you're right, it's all my fault. It's more about not letting the blame take root inside you, not letting it control your emotions and your reactions.
So it's like acknowledging that the blame exists, but choosing not to let it define you.
Exactly. You don't have to agree with the blame, but you also don't have to fight it. You can just let it pass through you.
Like a mental force field.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You're not letting the blame penetrate your inner space.
There was a really helpful analogy in one of the sources about clouds passing through the sky. We see them, we acknowledge their presence, but we don't try to grab onto them or control them.
Right, and that's the essence of acceptance, isn't it? Recognizing that something is there, but not resisting it, not fighting against it.
Okay, that makes a lot more sense.
And this ability to not be swept away by blame, to not let it control your emotions, that's actually a sign of what some call spiritual maturity.
So it's not about achieving some kind of perfect state of being. It's more about building that resilience.
Yeah. Exactly. It's about cultivating that inner stillness, that ability to observe what's happening within you without being completely controlled by it.
That resonates with me.
Yeah.
If you're grounded in yourself, then maybe external blame doesn't have to throw you off balance.
Right.
One of the sources used this really vivid metaphor of a river and a stone to illustrate this.
Oh, yeah, that's a great one.
Can you walk us through that?
Sure. So imagine a river flowing steadily, representing the flow of life, right?
Okay.
Now picture someone throws a stone into that river. What happens? Does the river stop? Does it try to push the stone back upstream?
No, it just keeps flowing.
Exactly. The river flows around the stone. It might cause a little ripple, a little disturbance, but the river's essence, its flow, remains unchanged.
Like that. The river doesn't get caught up in trying to fight the stone.
Right, and that's how we can approach blame. We can acknowledge its presence, but we don't have to let it define us. We don't have to let it stop our own flow.
There was also this really relatable story shared about a work project where the speaker found themselves being blamed for something.
Oh, yes, I remember that one. It felt very familiar. I think a lot of people have been in similar situations. The speaker talked about how they initially reacted by defending themselves, trying to justify their actions, and all it did was create more stress and anxiety.
That makes sense. It's easy to get caught up in that cycle of defensiveness.
Oh, absolutely. But then the speaker had this realization, this aha moment. They remembered these principles we're talking about and decided to try practicing non-resistance.
So instead of fighting the blame, they just let it be.
Pretty much, yeah. They didn't engage emotionally, didn't try to make excuses, and what they found was that the situation actually de-escalated. The conflict resolved itself more quickly, and they felt a lot more peaceful internally.
Wow, that's powerful. It sounds like by not feeding the blame with their own emotional energy, they actually took away its power.
Exactly. It's like deflating a balloon.
And this brings us to another aspect that was explored quite deeply, the role of the ego in all of this.
Yes, that's crucial to understanding why we react to blame the way we do. The sources explain that blame often triggers our ego, that part of us that's concerned with our image, our identity.
So like our sense of self.
Right. And
Yeah.
the ego sees blame as this personal attack. It feels threatened, and its natural response is to defend itself.
Ah, so that's where that immediate defensiveness comes from. It's the ego kicking in.
Exactly. One of the sources actually quoted Gurudev on this, saying that blame doesn't change the truth, it just reinforces the illusion of separation.
What does that mean? The illusion of separation.
The ego likes to see things in terms of me versus them. It creates this separation, this sense of being an individual separate from everything else.
Okay, so if we can become more aware of that, of the ego's role, how does that help us deal with blame?
Well, the idea is that if we don't identify so strongly with the ego, if we can observe it with a bit of detachment, then blame doesn't have to feel like such a personal attack. It becomes more like an event that's happening, something we can observe without getting completely swept up in it.
So we can see the blame, but it doesn't have to define us.
Exactly. We're not just our actions or our mistakes. We're the awareness that experiences all of it.
And this ties into the concept of surrender, right?
Mm.
Which I think is a word that can sometimes be misunderstood.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It can sound like giving up or admitting defeat, but in this context, it has a different meaning.
So what does surrender mean in this context?
It's about letting go of that inner resistance to blame. It's about not needing to control how others perceive us or whether they blame us.
So it's almost like surrendering to the possibility of being blamed.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that blame is a part of life, and it's okay. It doesn't have to control us.
There's this idea that holding on to blame, trying to fight it all the time, is actually really exhausting.
Oh, absolutely. You're constantly on guard, always defending yourself. It takes up so much energy.
And surrender is about letting go of that burden.
Exactly. It's about freeing yourself from that constant internal battle.
And when we do that, when we surrender, it opens up space for something else, something really important.
What's that?
Forgiveness.
Ah, yes.
Forgiving others and also forgiving ourselves.
Exactly. When we let go of that resistance to blame, we create space for forgiveness to emerge.
There's this incredibly moving story shared about someone struggling with intense self-blame.
Oh, yes, I remember that one. The speaker talked about how they'd made a mistake and were just consumed by guilt and self-reproach. They were constantly criticizing themselves, beating themselves up over it.
That internal critic could be so harsh.
It can be brutal. But then during meditation, the speaker had this realization. They saw how much they were suffering, how that constant self-blame was actually making things worse. And they had this profound insight that their worth as a person wasn't tied to their mistakes.
We're all human. We all make mistakes.
Exactly, and that's okay. And in that moment of acceptance, of self-forgiveness, the speaker felt a huge weight lift off of them.
That's so powerful. It reminds us that these principles aren't just about dealing with external blame. They apply to how we treat ourselves, too.
Absolutely. We can be our own worst critics.
One of the sources used a really beautiful metaphor to illustrate this, talking about the garden of our mind.
Oh, yes, I love that one.
Can you explain it?
So blame is like weeds in this garden, right? If we hold on to blame, if we let it fester, it just takes over. It chokes out all the beautiful flowers, all the positive things we want to cultivate.
So those negative thoughts and feelings,
Yeah.
they take over and stifle the good stuff.
Exactly. But when we let go of blame, it's like we're pulling out those weeds.
Yeah.
We're creating space for the flowers to grow, for our inner peace and happiness to flourish.
I like that. Forgiveness becomes like tending to the garden, nurturing the positive qualities within ourselves.
Exactly.
There was also this interesting idea presented that blame can actually be a tool for growth, even when it feels completely unfair.
Yes, that's a fascinating perspective. The idea is that our experiences of blame, even the painful ones, can reveal things about ourselves.
Like what kind of things?
Well, our attachments, for one. Our attachments to our self-image, our pride, our need to be right.
So even if the blame itself isn't justified, our reaction to it can show us what we're holding on to too tightly.
Precisely. It's like holding up a mirror to ourselves.
And this connects to the idea of karma, right?
Yeah, karma in the sense of cause and effect. Our reactions to blame create certain consequences, certain energetic patterns.
And those patterns can become quite ingrained, can't they?
They can, but by becoming aware of them, by seeing how we react to blame, we can start to break free.
There's this story shared about a very successful friend who was unfairly blamed for something.
Oh, yes, that one really stuck with me. They were known for being competent, always doing things right, and then they were blamed for something that wasn't their fault at all. And their initial reaction was anger, betrayal, all of that.
Understandably so.
Of course. But then they had this epiphany. They realized that their pain wasn't just about the injustice of the situation, it was also about their own attachment to this image of themselves as being successful, always right.
So the blame triggered something deeper.
Exactly. And by recognizing that, by letting go of that attachment, they actually experienced a lot of freedom.
It's like the blame, even though it was unfair, became a catalyst for growth.
Yes, it forced them to confront something within themselves.
And that leads us to another really powerful metaphor that was used. Blame as fire.
Ah, yes.
Fire.
What's the idea behind that metaphor?
Well, fire can be destructive, right? But it can also be transformative. It can burn away impurities, refine things, make them stronger.
So the idea is that blame, even though it's painful, can also be purifying.
Exactly. It can burn away our attachments, our ego, our need for external validation.
And what's left after the fire has done its work?
What's left is something stronger, something purer, a greater sense of inner peace and clarity. All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here, but it's all very theoretical. What are some practical things people can do when they're faced with blame?
Okay, so first and foremost, pause, breathe. Create that space between the accusation and your reaction. It's amazing how much that simple act can interrupt the automatic response of defensiveness.
Just that moment of pause can be so powerful.
It really can. Then, remind yourself that you don't need to defend yourself. Trust your own inner knowing. Your worth isn't dependent on what others think of you.
So letting go of that need for external validation.
Exactly. Also, try to practice inner detachment. See yourself as the observer, the witness to the situation, rather than getting completely lost in the drama of it all.
So stepping back a little bit, getting some perspective.
Right. And stay present. Don't let past hurts or future anxieties amplify your reaction to the blame.
Staying grounded in the here and now.
Exactly. Pay attention to how you're feeling physically and emotionally. What sensations are arising in your body, what emotions are present. Just notice them without judgment.
So becoming aware of our own reactions.
Yes. And then see if you can shift your perspective. Can you see the blame not as a personal attack, but as a potential opportunity to learn and grow?
That's a big one, reframing the experience.
It is. And practice forgiveness. Forgive yourself and forgive others. Holding on to resentment only hurts you in the end.
And lastly, remember that you don't always have to be right.
Ah, yes. Letting go of that need to be right can be incredibly liberating. Your peace of mind is more important than winning an argument. Well, we've seen how resisting blame can actually make it feel worse. It creates this internal struggle, this tug of war that just amplifies the negativity. Non-resistance, on the other hand, offers a path to freedom. It's not about accepting blame, but about choosing not to let it control us.
And blame can actually be an opportunity for growth.
Absolutely. It can help us become more aware of our own patterns, our attachments, the influence of the ego.
And ultimately, it's about surrendering. surrendering to the experience, letting go of the resistance, and finding that inner peace that's always available to us. So for our listeners, I encourage you to think about the last time you felt blamed. What was your reaction? How might things have been different if you had applied these principles?
It's something to ponder, for sure. Blame is a universal experience, but we don't have to be victims of it. We can choose to respond differently to find freedom and growth even in those challenging moments. So as we conclude our exploration of Gurudev's book, I just want to really emphasize this. Blame doesn't have to be a burden. Through surrender and non-resistance, it can actually become a profound source of release and inner peace. So listener, we invite you to consider embracing blame with this non-resistance and seeing it as a chance to release negative karma.
Yeah. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this. The next time you find yourself on either end of blame, either being blamed or wanting to blame someone else,
Yeah.
see if you can observe the situation through this new lens, the lens of non-resistance and karmic release.
Yeah.
What shifts might occur within you?
Yeah.
It's in that mindful awareness that the real transformation will happen.
Beautifully said.
Thank you.
So until next time,
Yeah, until next time.
be well.
Be well.